In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. My dear audience, this is your presenter, Dr. Mamdouh Mohamed. I will continue with you this episode talking about the previous topic, which is mainly the main topic of these episodes, is our children at school. First of all, I greet you with the Islamic greeting, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I'm quite sure that you still remember the previous episode when we were talking about teaching Arabic to non-speakers of Arabic, teaching Arabic as a foreign language. Now we are going to make a small shift to give some examples, good practices of teaching Arabic to the Arabs. With the same token, most of the teachers would love to follow the textbook step by step, although sometimes by avoiding following the steps sequentially, step by step, they save a lot of time if they think of other creative ways. One example is teaching reading. In most of the classes that we see that, a class of 30 students or sometimes more, you would find the teacher, after making a model reading by himself or herself, you would find the teacher asking one student to do the reading. And then, even sometimes the teachers exaggerate this issue and would give that student extra time at the expense of other students. So for example, would ask student number X to begin reading, and the student begins reading paragraph. Then you expect that the teacher would ask another student to read another paragraph, but unfortunately, you would find that the teacher is letting the students because he's good, and he would continue probably 2 minutes, 3 minutes, sometimes in some cases 10 minutes. And all the other students are listening to the student who is reading. What is going on here is that this student is the one who develops the skill of reading, whereas all the others develop the skill of listening. So the goal or the objective that the teacher had and presented in the beginning of the class is really not achieved in the classroom, simply because using this method. The teacher needs to think of a different strategy or a different technique to enable the students to develop and promote their learning or the reading skill. One way of doing it is, for example, changing the setting of the classroom. And instead of the students are sitting like that in rows, the teacher would change the setting by asking each two students would sit in a way to confront each other. So here we would have a student A and a student B, a student C and a student D, and so on and so forth. They are in front of each other. And she would ask the students, all the students who are sitting in this row, to begin reading, and the students in this row are listening to them. And in fact, he or she can encourage these students on the left to correct their counterparts, the other students who are reading. And this would take probably 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, 15 students are practicing the reading. And instead of the first example, whereas only one student is practicing the reading, while all the others are listening. They're passive listeners. Now 15 at a time. So it takes them 5 minutes to read and finish. So all of them read. And after 5 minutes, the teacher can flip the coin and would make this row start reading and this row would start listening. And I think in 10 minutes time, you will find almost every student in the class had the opportunity to develop reading. This is one strategy of doing it. I remember that I was in one of the classes and the teacher was doing an amazing experiment for me. I've never seen something like this in my lifetime, but I liked it very much. She asked two students sitting beside each other to read at the same time. And they read at the same time, and all of them at the same pace. Even every time there is a full stop, they stop together as if it is one person was reading. It was very interesting. She was trying to show us an example of reading, and the teacher can do this at the same time. Even all the students can practice reading and see, and this is probably at an advanced level, but I think it's also another technique that the teachers can benefit from. There are many techniques, and I'm quite sure that every creative teacher would think of an example of teaching that is vivid and very creative and benefits the majority of the students, or most of the students, or all the students. If the purpose of the class in the learning objective is developing the reading skill of the students, so most of the techniques that are used should help the teacher achieve this goal. Now, this is an example of reading. There are many other ways by dividing the students into groups. And these groups, the teacher would, for example, have a good student in this group of 4 or 5, and each group like that has one student who's outstanding. And when each one of these students is reading, this model student or this outstanding student would correct them if they make mistakes. And the teacher would step back and would watch and observe the students are working in this format. And this way the teacher can observe more than put herself. And from time to time she would check the quality of reading of that student or this student. And in this way also she would teach most of the students the skill of reading. One of the common practices, let me tell you that in teaching Arabic as a native language, you will find the teacher focusing on the knowledge at expense of the skill. Okay, now, good teachers usually make balance between knowledge from one side and skill at the other side, especially when they teach languages. Because mainly any language is a group of skills more than knowledge. A language is different from teaching geography, for example, or history, which is mainly depending on the amount of knowledge. Now let's first of all differentiate between what do we mean by saying piece of knowledge and what do we mean by saying a skill. I like usually to give this example because it's simple, everybody can remember it. The piece of knowledge here is that the objective is that I need to put in basketball playing, for example, the goal is to catch the ball and throw it in the basket. And the objective is to let the ball go through the basket. This is the piece of knowledge. What is it? If I ask any one of you, I'm quite sure that you can repeat it. It's very simple. It took 3 or 4 seconds for any one of you to learn this piece of information. So now you get the knowledge, very easy now. But now, this is not the goal of playing basketball. The goal is really to put it, to practice it and to put it in the basketball. So now you know the knowledge, but you see in practice, you cannot put it. To give you the difference between me, and she was trying to find all the activities that would help him or her to reach these learning objectives. It will guide the teacher. Instead of going to the class without preparing the material, without knowing the goals that you want to achieve from this class. So now a teacher knows the difference between the knowledge and the skill. But again, the teacher needs some time to practice this many times until it becomes a habit. Although we know now the difference between them, but still, we do not expect the teachers to do this overnight. They need some practice, continuous practice, until it becomes part of them, until it becomes built in, until it goes into their genes and it becomes a habit. They do it automatically whenever they are confronted with this. I don't really mean physically that it will go to the genes, but I mean that it becomes part of them. Now, if the teacher does this, focus on the skill, let's give some examples that we see in classrooms. When we find the teacher, for example, all the teachers, for example, in grade 2 focus on teaching the alif lam in Arabic language, because we have 2 of them. One of them is called the Shamsiyya, the sunny one, and the other one is called Qamariyya, the moon ones or the lunar ones. And the difference between them, in this case, when we write this alif lam here, followed by a specific number of letters, we read it. We read these letters, and it becomes quite obvious that this lam is pronounced. For example, Bayt, when we add to it alif lam, it becomes al-Bayt. Whereas the other category, when you put L and you try to read the word, this L is not pronounced. This lam is not pronounced. Like, for example, Shams, when you put alif lam before it, it becomes ash-Shams. And in many cases, you get into a classroom, you find a teacher is focusing on that the rules. Do you memorize the letter that come after alif lam of this category, the sunny? And she would focus on this. Who can tell me? So the students start saying that, okay, these letters are the sheen and the seen, and they start trying to recall these letters, and they are supposed to memorize this. But in reality, nothing in the world that's similar to the situation. Nobody stops you and asks you what are the sunny letters or what are the moon letters. It's not something practical at all. You can see that the people who did not study at schools, the native speakers, they learn it naturally because they practice all these words in their daily life, and they don't need to know that all these letters, they pronounce the alif lam before it, and all these letters, they don't pronounce it. You don't need to memorize the letter. You need to practice this, and this only happens when the teacher prepares her lesson and knows well the objectives and how to achieve these objectives. She can select a number of words on every letter, and just by repeating them, she would say Shams, and the students would say Ash-Shams. Shamal, and the students would say Ash-Shamal. And by doing many words, it immediately becomes part of them and becomes natural because they listen to it many times. And the teacher, for example, can play a CD or can play an audio tape and has many examples and ask the students to stop and repeat the word that falls into this category or that category. Just by practicing it, the students do not need at all to memorize these 14 letters here and these 14 letters here. And if you ask any native speaker, he would be reluctant to remember all these letters. But in reality, he practices correctly. Let me just give you an analogy here. When I ask you, when I teach you this piece of knowledge, and I explain to you the rules of swimming, and if you, for example, I tell you that the first step, you stand at the edge of the swimming pool. The second one is that you extend your hands and then you jump. And then after that, the third step is you take a breath and then you look into the right and take a breath, and then you put it again in the water and do this and explain to you the rules, and you spend some time to memorize them. Perhaps it may take you 1 or 2 or 3 minutes to memorize the rules of swimming. And then after you memorize these rules, and I ask you to jump into the swimming pool or to jump into the sea, I'm quite sure that you will be reluctant, and you will know that this knowledge, although you know it and you memorize it, will not help you when you jump into the water, which is a skill that needs to be practiced and to be supervised by someone beside you until you get the skill, the actual skill of swimming. So knowing the knowledge about swimming does not benefit you a lot in the swimming itself. I hope by this example you can understand the difference between the skill and the piece of knowledge. The teachers need to understand that a lot of pieces of knowledge that they teach inside the classroom, especially in language classes, really they are not really needed by the students. They need to think of something, some activities and some tasks that would help the students develop the skill itself instead of focusing on the piece of knowledge. And the same thing, this is applicable to grammar, because mainly grammar is knowledge. You give information about the language, and you will find the students in some cases, they memorize the rule quite enough, and the teacher would ask them and they would repeat the rule and they would say the rule correctly in a very beautiful language. But in practice, when they start speaking the language, they would not apply the rule in their daily life. In other words, they have done this part of the knowledge, but they did not do the part of the skill. And that's why the teachers need to keep this balance between knowledge and practice. And I myself think that little attention should be given to the knowledge of grammar. And what counts is the ability to practice it in reality and not to make mistakes to apply it correctly, as they already got the skill of swimming, as they already got the skill of reading and other skills. Now, the same thing is applicable to this. So the teacher would know, make a balance between them. And when we talk about the balance, we never mean that it is 50% versus 50% at all. This is not the balance that we're talking about. We may talk about 20% focus on knowledge, the rule, the grammatical rule, and 80% would go to the practice, because this is the outcome that we see. And therefore, it's no wonder students at school, they would be able to tell you and to articulate the grammatical rule. However, they don't practice it in real life. This is quite an obvious example that we see in many schools. I would say here again, I would remind everybody, the teachers now and the parents now learned this from. Yes, it is true that the textbooks sometimes don't help the teacher, but this is the role of the teacher. You accepted to be a teacher, and you need to remember what I began with when I told you that the Prophet ﷺ said that if you are doing something, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves to see you perfecting it. So perfection here means that you look for other strategies to apply to achieve this goal, which here is applicable to learning the skill of speaking or writing, applying this grammatical rule that you learned. You need to think of activities, and I'm quite sure you'll find plenty of books that would help you do that. And it is the same activity that you find in other languages. So if the book doesn't have a lot of exercises to help you to achieve this, it becomes compulsory on you. It becomes an obligation on you that you prepare these examples, plenty of them, and you bring a handout done by you, you prepared it. Yes, you did an extra effort, and most of the teachers don't want. And this is the difference between one teacher and another teacher. But this is where is you can access paradise. When you exert an effort, when you try to help the students achieve the goal that you have been looking for. I hope that if you don't understand what I say here, I can give you plenty of examples. You can always email me. You have access to my email, which is mamdouh2000@hotmail.com. And the spelling of Mamdouh is MAMDOUH2000@hotmail.com. And I hope you benefited from this episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Mamdouh Mohamed. Oh, people of the